Welcome to Human Trafficking and the church's fight against it. So the church versus human trafficking. I'm Chris Harrison. I'm currently the senior pastor of Athens First United Methodist Church. The purpose of this presentation is to help the church answer two questions. What do I need to know about human trafficking? And what is God calling us to do to get involved in eradicating human trafficking? This segment is going to help us understand the connection between human trafficking and foster care and what we need to know about that. Our presenter today is going to be Amber Knowles, who's with us from the Riverside Project. Amber, let me say a quick prayer, and then I'll turn it over to you for you to share your screen. Dear Lord, as we come into this conversation, we focus in on the intersection of two things that are impacting the children in our midst, the foster care system and human trafficking. There are such overlaps and intertwinings and interconnected tissue with these two things, and we need to see that clearly. And God, I know that you have equipped Amber to give us that information and to also to help mobilize the church to find ways that we can engage in these specific areas and add your love to them. So just be with Amber today. Just fill her with your spirit. Let the words coming out of her mouth be filled with you and help us to hear as the church what we can do to make a difference alongside her and others working in these areas through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, Amber, it's all yours.
Great, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay? Great, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. All right, can you see that? We are good to go. Okay, thanks so much again for having me. You may know me from Fostering Family, which is our organization name. We launched a project about a year and a half ago called the Riverside Project. We're actually in a rebranding phase, and so you will hear more of us as the Riverside Project in the months to come. This project has been doing some work just in the child welfare space in the Houston area, but we're really grateful for just the opportunity to share specifically on how does foster care connect with trafficking. It's a question that we get a lot, and so we're always grateful for an opportunity to share. And we just have a whole lot to learn from the great people who have been on all of these different calls. We work alongside of many of them to try and understand what is this link between foster care and trafficking, and how can we come together in order to put a stop to that or to intervene in that place. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides, and we're going to actually zoom out a little bit from the conversation that's been happening already. And then we will, I promise, zoom back in. I just want to give a context for what we're talking about here and where that connection is. And I think that will help us to spring forward into the details of how foster care does connect to trafficking. So I am going to, well, I'll just introduce myself a little bit more first. As Chris said, my name is Amber Knowles. I am the executive director of Fostering Family. I am a pediatric nurse practitioner by background. I have an experience in community health and school-based health care. And so that has really influenced the way that we look to holistically support vulnerable kids and families, not just from one aspect of their health, but a holistic picture of support and stability. I'm also a foster and adoptive parent. Two of our kiddos came to us through foster care. And so, of course, like many other people working in this field, a personal experience and a recognition of the gaps that we see have really created this desire and this passion to see to it that families don't fall through the cracks. We had a huge just the experience has really given us a heart for biological families, which are often left out of the equation, and trying to understand their vulnerabilities as well. And so again, a lot of that kind of springboarded us into launching Fostering Family. Additionally, my husband, Drew, is a pastor and church planter in the Houston area. We have been a part of a church planting church for the last 10 years. And we actually just planted a church on Easter. So we have been very busy in all facets of life, but really it's all three of these worlds that have kind of collided to create what we have built as the Riverside Project. So I'm going to start off just by playing a video to explain what the Riverside Project is. Just this idea of the river. What is that language? There is no river that runs through Houston, if you didn't know that already. But really, we would say that there is a river that is running through the middle of Houston. It's just a metaphorical river. It is a river that really represents vulnerability. And we know that trafficking is the exploitation of that vulnerability. And so what is this river? We have this video that will share a little bit about that, and then we'll really dig into the specifics and the details.
Imagine that you and two friends are standing on the bank of a river. To your surprise, you see children in the water rushing down the rapids toward a waterfall. You spring into action. One friend jumps in and begins to pull children out of the water. The second friend runs downstream to catch as many children as possible before they go over the waterfall. And a third friend runs upstream to find out why these kids are in the river in the first place and tries to put a stop to it. All three friends have the same mission. They must get children out of the water and onto dry ground. But for this rescue mission to be successful, these three friends should not all do the same thing. They need to do the right thing, and they need the right tools to do it effectively. The foster care system is situated in the middle of this river. Foster care isn't an isolated problem. It exists along many other social issues affecting our city. Poverty, lack of education, pregnancy, homelessness, trafficking, and incarceration occur, both as reasons why children enter foster care and results when children don't exit foster care with loving, stable connections. We believe we can disrupt this cycle, but we can't do it alone. We have a vision to see hundreds of churches, nonprofits, businesses, and individuals strategically positioned along the river and fully equipped to help kids and families find stable footing on dry ground. We cannot and should not all do the same thing, but we can all do something. Are you ready to find your place along the river? Visit our website and submit a contact form. Together we can make Houston a place where families heal and children thrive.
Okay. So that gives us a little bit of an understanding of what is this river that we're talking about. We know that foster care as a system is very closely connected to all of these different social issues. It's not one isolated problem that we see in our city. Foster care is actually connected to lots of different social issues that affect vulnerable families and children, and trafficking is one of them. So we have this model that kind of explains the river in a more of a model form. So we see foster care being kind of midstream of this river, but we have all of these different social issues that we see upstream that cause kids and families to enter what we would call the foster care system. And that adds a whole different host of challenges. And when kids, as it said in the video, kids and families don't find stability within that system, they don't find themselves getting out of the water and stabilizing on the side, what we see are all of these, many of the same social issues that happen downstream, where we would say this waterfall is happening. We see homelessness, poverty, incarceration rates of, from the percentage of people who are incarcerated who spent time in foster care is staggering. And then we see this big topic that we're talking about today, which is trafficking. Trafficking, as it said on the video, is both a reason why kids enter foster care, but it is most often seen as a downstream issue. If we were to work and really follow the stories of those who are in trafficking currently, many of them have found that they were at one point impacted by the foster care system. And so a lot of what we're talking about here is trying to understand that connection, that there is a connection there, recognizing that there is this aspect of the river where we have to intervene and work together rather than working as separate issues. We have to understand the connection and try to intervene in the middle of it. A couple of things I'll point out just on this slide that we talk often about is that one of the things that we talk about when we go upstream is that what we don't see happening on the upstream side of things, if we're sending somebody upstream to find out why are kids in foster care in the first place, what are all the issues that are happening in our city to cause them to funnel into this system, what we don't often see are really stable families on the side of the river just throwing their kids in, right? What we see when we go upstream are entire families who are living life in the river, trying to keep their heads above the water while also trying to keep their kids' heads above the water. It's not sustainable and it's not safe. And oftentimes they get separated, or, historically we will remove the child from the river, but then we leave the family to move on down. And we see something similar when we look downstream. We see kids who have been often in a system, and we'll talk about this in a minute, a system for a while. Their story may still be that upstream story, but we have moved down into the foster care system and they didn't find stability there often. And instead they either age out of the foster care system, or they are actually trafficked while they're in the foster care system, which sounds crazy that happens, but it happens very, very often, at least in our city. And so we really do have to understand, what is this connection and how do we intervene, and how do you intervene? How does a church intervene into this space? Because the reality is, what we see is that we will never deal with the problem of trafficking unless we also deal with the problem of foster care, or helping to stabilize families, and specifically teenagers in the foster care system, giving them loving, stable connections as they move into adulthood. That is going to be the answer. The question is just, how do we do that? And what is your role in making that happen? So I know that's a lot of information on this slide. The last thing I want to point out is this arrow at the top. This is not just a strictly downstream river that we're talking about. This is almost more like a raging but lazy river. If it's not disrupted somewhere, the cycle will continue. I bet many of these trafficking organizations that have shared today have probably seen this cycle of vulnerability happening over and over and over again. But we believe that it is the church's role, alongside lots of different partners in the city, to be the vehicle for redemption for families in our city. And so that is where we're headed throughout the rest of our time together. So one thing I want to point out too is that when we talk about intervening in the child welfare space, and I think this is something similar, there's probably something similar that trafficking organizations probably use more downstream. We're talking about a holistic approach to pulling kids and families out of this river of vulnerability to stabilize them on the side. What we are not talking about is fishing kids and families out of the river, right? We're not just throwing them a life raft and saying, moving on down the side. We are actually figuring out, how do we step into the river ourselves, which will be required if we are going to help children and families. It will require some level of discomfort, but we do have tools, right? We have the ability to work together to step into the river and then make sure that we're engaging them holistically. We're not just throwing them a life raft. We're actually wanting to connect them to resources in our community to meet all of their needs. And that we really see the church as the gateway for making this happen, making sure that they know where resources are located to be able to come around a family and build a support system around them, regardless of where they are on the river. So there's a book called Upstream. I highly recommend it if you're jotting things down or jotting notes down. There's a book called Upstream. You can get it on Amazon. It is by Dan Heath, not Dr. Paul Batalden, as it says here. This is just a quote from the book. But the book is really focused on this concept. It's a business book. It's not specific to child welfare or any one particular issue. It's actually focused more on the business side of things. But in the book, this quote is used often. He says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And whether that is one specific social system or one specific issue that we're trying to address, or if it's just a personal problem that you continually have over and over and over again, your current system is perfectly designed to get those results. And in foster care, if what we're seeing is kids are aging out of foster care and being trafficked, or kids are running away from their group home, or not finding stable placements and connections to adulthood, we're seeing those outcomes further downstream. But our current system fully, that's not a knock on any one particular part of that system, that is all of us, our system is currently designed perfectly to get those results. And so those things that we see happen downstream are never going to change unless we recognize the gaps in the system, and then we ourselves step into those gaps as a community and as a collaborative effort to make change in the system so that we get different results. And so that's a lot of the work that we do as an organization, is understanding where those gaps are and making those connections to find sustainable solutions, and really working with partners all across the river to be able to really have the impact that we want for our city. So let's talk specifically about this this connection with trafficking. We kind of zoomed out a bit to understand how these fit together in terms of this river analogy. But now let's kind of zoom in specifically right there where foster care connects to trafficking as an organization. A couple of just statistics that I think are important to this conversation. What we see often, those who are at most risk for trafficking are teenagers in the foster care system, specifically teenagers who do not have loving, stable relationships, who are helping to move them into adulthood successfully. And unfortunately, that is a lot of children in the foster care system who are teenagers. If they enter over the age of 7, the likelihood of being placed with a family is much smaller, and the likelihood of them aging out of the foster care system and being particularly susceptible to trafficking increases with every year. So just a few stats on teenagers in foster care. We're specifically talking about ages 4 to 17. There are, at least in Region 6, which is the Houston area, Harris County, and surrounding counties, there are about 443 teenagers in the Region 6 foster care system. About 336 of them are living in RTCs, or group homes. Houston has far more group home facilities than any other part of the state of Texas. And so it is a particular challenge in our context, and a particular vulnerability toward trafficking in the Houston area, in my opinion, than anywhere else in the state. On average, this group of kids in foster care have an average of 6 to 7 disrupted placements, which means they step into a placement, whether that's in a home, a group home, or a foster placement. They may have, difficult behaviors or trauma that has been unresolved, and then they end up, they would run away or have the placement disrupted for a number of reasons. But as you could imagine, with every single placement disruption, the self-worth of a teenager or a child who is in this system for no fault of their own, their self-worth just gets cut in half every single time. And so by the time that they end up older, they are looking for someone to love them. They are looking for someone to belong to. They are looking for protection. And those are the things that traffickers prey on with this specific type of population of children. So a few additional statistics that I think are really important. In fiscal year 2020, over 2,000 children in foster care went missing. So 5% of children who were in foster care in the year 2020, or the fiscal year 2020, about 2,000 of them went missing. This can be for a number of reasons. Again, kids living in congregate care want to be in a family. They do not want to live in a group setting that way. They're not getting the type of stability and relationship that many of them really need. And so many of them run away. Many of them, I think the biggest reason is kids running away. And I will say there is a statistics that does say that within, that just recently came out, that for kids who run away from their either foster home or group home, they will be, the statistics are showing that they will be impacted or connected to a trafficker or a pimp within 48 hours. It is a known statistic at this point that when kids leave group homes, there are traffickers and pimps waiting for them because they offer them everything that they want. The things I just mentioned: belonging, protection, love. And so this is a particular vulnerability that really warrants a lot of understanding and intervention. Of these 2,000 kids who went missing, 90% of them were found by the end of the fiscal year. and 136 of them reported being victimized while missing, and 68 of them were confirmed victims of trafficking during that year. Additionally, 93 of them exited conservatorship or aged out while they were missing. And then 30 of them, the court terminated legal responsibility for them while they were missing. So those are startling statistics. Unfortunately, there's lots of work to be done. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can step in and help. So one thing I know that I like to use this slide right after that last one, because the last one usually has eyes going really wide and hearts really burdened for what's happening in our city that we don't realize. And it is really disheartening to see those things, but there is hope. There is a lot to be hopeful about. And one thing that I like to mention here is within about 2 decades ago, it was really understood, or thought to be understood, that kids who had been impacted by trauma, particularly the type of trauma that happens with abuse and neglect, that kids were just brain damaged, that they could not recover from that. And they were just always going to struggle, and they were always going to just not be able to connect with people, not be able to love. The reality, though, through different types of interventions and neuroscience that we've seen, studies and statistics that have actually shown that healing, significant amounts of healing can happen. But the reality is trauma that happens in relationship must be healed in relationship. Relationship is the key to heal from the type of trauma that many of these kids have gone through. And so when the relationship and the connection does not happen, we still get the outcomes that we've always seen. And these kids will continue to be susceptible to the things, all the bad things that happen over that waterfall. The reality is, though, what they need in order to heal is you. It is 100% a trusted relationship. Loving, stable relationships will help them to heal from the past trauma. The problem is many of us don't often want to step into, or don't think that we're able to step into those types of relationships when they so desperately do need them. So what does that actually mean? I want to spend just a few minutes here, but I really want to spend a lot of time taking questions if possible, or having more of a discussion here, because this is a type of presentation that really does warrant a discussion, and not just me telling you all the things that I think we all need to do, but actually understand the things that we're talking about here and exploring them together. But I want to spend a couple of minutes on what do we do about this? For you who are listening, for your church, for your organization, what do we need to do when we talk about going upstream? And I think the first thing is understanding and recognizing that there is this connection and that there is this vulnerability. We can't just work in this system or this system. We actually have to work on the connection, because that's the part that often gets missed. And so working together is a big part of that. But for you as individually, sometimes that means you can foster a child, particularly a child who is older, a child who has more complex needs, or a sibling group. That is not something that we say everyone should do. I do not believe every person should foster or adopt a child. That is not for everyone, but for some of you it is. And so if that is something that has been kind of on your heart and something that you want to explore further, we have a ton of different resources. Being able to step into and provide a home to a child where they don't have to end up in a group home is a significant way to prevent trafficking in our city. And so we can certainly explore that with you. Next, you can support a foster family. So if you know of a foster family in your community, it is not an easy thing to work through, regardless of if the child is 6 months old or 16. Any child who has experienced trauma, it is not an easy thing to work through. And so being a support to a family by offering to babysit, mowing their grass, dropping off coffee, just being able to be there and support them and really build a support system around them will allow them to keep going. And so it is, a lot of people think, well, I can't foster a kid, so I can't do anything. You have so many things that you can offer just by supporting a family and making sure that that family stays stable. The next one is become a mentor. So we work with a number of group homes across the city of Houston. We work with a number of mentoring organizations that work in those group homes. And so we have a kind of mentor interest form. And if that's something that, you want to build a connection with a teenager in foster care, just to be a support for them, we can absolutely help to connect you to an organization that does just that. And so I can definitely send that over to Chris so that he can send it out if anybody is interested. But becoming a mentor for an older kid in foster care can be a huge, huge way to prevent a child from being trafficked. And then lastly, mobilizing your church. We really have a vision to one day see hundreds of churches and nonprofits and businesses and individuals really strategically aligned along this river. And so again, just like every person shouldn't do the same thing, we believe that every church shouldn't do the same thing. We want churches to step into the need in their community in the best way that they can. And so sometimes that can look like a lot of different things. So if that's something that you would love to be a part of, or you want to learn more about, we can certainly help to connect you. So one thing I wanted to point out too is that at least in Harris County, we are building collaboratives of these different churches and nonprofits in each part of the city. And so if you do find yourself in Harris County, the way that we kind of execute this project is by creating collaboratives of churches and nonprofits and educators all in one part of the city who are working together to meet the needs of vulnerable families. So just a little bit of specifics on how we do that in Harris County. It probably looks different if you're in a different county. And then just to leave you with this, I just want to come back to this image, right? So this river of vulnerability that we see running through our city, the question that I want to ask you is where are you and where can you step in? Somewhere along the river as you're walking beside it, and now knowing that there is this river of vulnerability in our city or in your city, that there are kids and families who are vulnerable in it, whether that's upstream, midstream, or downstream. Where is your place? What is your place to intervene, and what resources and assets and gifts and talents can you steward for the good of those who are vulnerable? Because you do have a role to play. There is no I don't think any person who doesn't have some sort of a role to play in actually pulling kids and families out of this river and stabilizing them on the side. And so if we can be a resource to you, if we can just help to connect you or give you resources, mobilize your church, we want to be able to help you do that. And here's my contact information. If you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to me. If you have a way that you would like to connect, or if you'd like to get more information, you can certainly call me as well. We have a team of people who would be willing to work with you and get you connected or answer your questions. And that's it. Chris, I'd be happy to take any questions that people have if there are any.
Yeah, so we're looking, I know Marla's on the call, so that'll be good to have her to come on the call as well. As always, I just love how you sent that. You know how many times I've retold that Riverside story and used it in lots of different contexts, because I think it's so applicable. Outside of, if you're a church anywhere, and Marla, I want you to come on. We're about to bring you on here to the call too. How are you doing today, Marla?
I'm good. How are you, friend?
Good. So let's talk a few minutes just generally about some different ways that churches can be involved. I know we mentioned this some, but let's get even a little more specific. And Marla, definitely draw on things that that y'all have done and that we've done through Oasis and One Love and things like that. But give the person out there listening who's at a church in Lufkin, what's something that I can do to help in this specific part of the conversation?
You know, honestly, it's more about looking at what can't you do? Because just as Amber was talking about, everybody can do something. And it starts with, what are we comfortable doing? Or what do we think we can stretch our outside of our comfort zone just enough to begin? We, with Oasis and One Love Collaborative, and with the support of KUMC and Providence and Amber, we've been able to start a mentor program and a tutoring program and host events. But it doesn't, you don't have to start there. You can start by just even partnering up with another church that's got an existing relationship. Providence and KUMC partnered up because it was really, when we started, too big for just one church. What we were trying to do wasn't that big. We were just that scared, to be very honest. But we stepped out in faith and really just trusted what Amber had told us and what the Lord was leading us to do. And that was just to simply find a way to love on these kids. And it sounds like, oh gosh, that seems like such a dreamy idea, blah, blah, blah. It is as simple as that. And we have said over and over again, if we didn't have a mentor program, if we didn't have a tutoring program, if we didn't open up a child without placement emergency shelter, what's the most basic thing that we are going to always go back to do? And that is finding ways to love on these kids. And so, these churches, they can, come up, they can provide a support group or educational Saturdays or after church to bring in people that can provide information on how to support these kids in foster care and these families in foster care. They can simply start, and this is a good one because churches already have, their Sunday service, their child watching. They've got most churches have the location already. Provide a parents' night out. You can actually, even if you want to, you can get volunteers, but you can hire in some people that are certified in babysitting foster kids, or you could bring in some respite providers that already are certified, ask them to volunteer their time, because I am all about finding people that can just volunteer or provide things in kind donations. Don't be afraid to ask people, and just start small, just start.
Yeah, and I think that as somebody personally who's been a foster and adoptive parent, I think when we talk about it, we realize how many people, I can't tell you how many people that I've met in sharing some of my story that people go, oh, I'm adopted, or we adopted.
Right.
I think getting things like this into the conversation and culture of our churches, when we're talking about adoption and fostering, very biblical, scriptural concepts and thoughts. But when we start talking about them out loud, we start finding how much a part of us it already is. We don't have to find a residential treatment center down the road. It's already right here in our midst.
Yeah.
And to re-engage with how hard it is to be, we looked at the statistics Amber shared, how hard it is to be a foster parent, and how can I then support them? Maybe it's simple, just tapping into what we Christians do well, make casserole sometimes, and just create a loving network around our foster and adoptive families there in our congregation. Can be easy ways that we quickly, doesn't take additional training. It's just a first step. And there's so many little first steps like that of supporting, food and clothing type pantries with particular emphasis upon foster and adoptive. When a foster child shows up, they often show up with nothing. And to be able to be a church that just comes alongside that. And so I love how holistic this is. And I love that part of the connection in this is that, and Amber, you put it so beautifully, if we take care of the vulnerable children well, that gets upstream of the trafficking. And that's part of the key in all. And so how we decrease those number of moves and active placements and all that is just key. And any church can do some part of this. Any person can. But it really, the more the church steps up, the better off we're going to be in dealing with something.
It's one of the things that I'll add to what you said about churches stepping in. One of the first questions that we have when a church says, hey, we want to do something, we just have no idea what to do. The first question that we ask is, who in your church, inside of your church, is vulnerable? So are there foster families? And sometimes we just don't know. And it's usually pastors that just kind of hang their head and say, we just don't know. Like, well, that's okay. Our first homework is, let's find out. Because foster families are vulnerable families, and the kids in their homes are vulnerable. And adoptive families, as you know, both of you on the call, or both of you here, as adoptive families, the trauma does not stop when the gavel goes down. And so we have to teach our congregations and disciple them too, that just because we have families who have adopted doesn't mean that they're not still vulnerable. And then we talk about kinship families, relatives who are caring for their loved ones. They're not the ones saying, hey, I need help, my family is in shambles, I'm taking care of my 4 grandkids. Those are in our churches. They are there, and their kids, if those placements break down and grandmother can no longer take care of them, they enter the group home, and then they start moving placements. We see it all the time. Those are the kids who are especially vulnerable, and we have an opportunity because they're in our churches. We just don't know about it. And then biological families who are at risk of losing their kids. We should be, as churches, places where those families can find refuge. We talk a lot in our church leader trainings about we are discipling people around the incarnation of Christ, that he moved not away from what was broken in our midst, he moved toward us in our brokenness, and therefore we are the type of people who move toward the broken in our city too. And so even just using that as the springboard that gets us thinking about what is actually happening in my own community. It doesn't have to be, I go sign up to be a foster parent today. It is, I recognize that there are families in our church that I'm going to move toward, or there are my kids' friends at school who I know are vulnerable, or working with the school district. There's so many different ways. Just go near to those who are vulnerable or broken and in need of help rather than away. And that's a huge first step.
Yep. And to put in a quick plug, you mentioned it. If you're watching this now or sometime and you've never heard of trust-based relational intervention, TBRI, go find out what it is and go get trained, because it's not only applicable to foster care and trafficking, it will reframe so much of the way that you interact in your marriage, your workplace, and everywhere, as you deal with the impacts of trauma and how to really help people and meet people where they are. And then isn't that what Jesus always tells us to do? To find ways to meet people exactly where they are so we can love them more fully. Well, thank y'all so much. I love you both, and I appreciate your voices. And you impress me with the work and the love that you share with the world and the vulnerable around you. And I really appreciate hearing from you today, and just look forward to the impact that it's going to have on churches and lives everywhere. So God bless you both. Up next, we're going to be talking about direct intervention, that part of the river that Amber was describing, where you're just jumping right in and directly intervening. So hopefully you'll be back with us at the 3 o'clock hour to hear more about that from Elijah Rising and Rescue America, and another church team that's doing some really good intervention work.